If you like our podcast, we think you'll love our Next Economy MBA. It's a 9-month learning journey for entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, and aspiring change makers alike. Our MBA gives emerging leaders a new set of blueprints for creating life-serving, regenerative organizations. We explore topics like regenerative finance, cooperative models of ownership, alternative economics, and much more. You'll leave inspired by the stories of leading Next Economy organizations, and you'll be nourished by a community of mission-aligned peers. So we invite you to join our flourishing community of more than 275 alumni and growing. Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to learn more. That's lifteconomy.com/MBA to learn more. Cohort 8, our newest cohort, starts on March 29th, 2022. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Hello, my name is Erin Axelrod, a partner worker owner at Lift Economy, and I am overjoyed to be here with Katrina Spade. Katrina has been an entrepreneur and designer since 2002. She has over 15 years of experience in project management, finance, architecture, and has a focus on human-centered ecological solutions. So while she was earning her Master's of Architecture, Katrina invented a system to transform the dead into soil, which is now patent pending. In 2014, she founded the 501c3 Urban Death Project to bring attention to the problem of a toxic, disempowering funeral industry. And in 2017, she founded Recompose, a public benefit corporation. Katrina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Erin. It's nice to be here.
Wow. So you work in a very specific field, and I'm sure all our listeners are wondering, how did you get into this? What sparked the curiosity and interest in this space?
It is so weird that I do this work. I know. But I was in grad school for architecture. Actually, I should go back even further. A few years before that, I spent some time at an amazing school called Yestermorrow Design Build School in Vermont. And I was there to learn about natural building techniques and design basics. And I think as part of my certificate, I was required to take a permaculture design course. And I was like, permaculture design, what is that? I guess I have to take this course and I'll do it. It's fine. And then many of your listeners will not be surprised. I was blown away by the concept and by the content of that course. At the same time, during that time at Yestermorrow, I decided I did indeed want to follow my passion of design. And what would architecture school be like? Let's try it. So I applied to architecture school and went to architecture school with this really great tool bag of permaculture design basics in my tool belt. And that was great because I went to architecture school with a fair amount of healthy criticism about the profession of architecture and really thinking about sustainable design, ecological design, and how it could permaculture inform us and all that. I'd also turned 30, which is important because sometimes for some of us, when you turn 30, you realize that you're mortal. You're like, oh my God, time is really passing. I'm getting older every day. And I had this moment just as architecture school started and I had these 2 young kids just feeling really old at 30. I know it's not very old. I felt mortal. And so I started looking into the funeral industry in grad school, which is kind of cool. You can do that sort of thing, right? It's the luxury of being in a design program, thinking about human created systems, because architecture isn't just about buildings. It's also about systems that we humans create and put into place in the world. And so I started to look into the funeral industry. And that was the beginning of this journey. And in retrospect, my parents composted everything. they were in medicine. We talked a lot about patients dying and just like the cycles of life and death. It's not that far off that I landed here in death care, but it was like kind of a circuitous journey, I think, in a way.
Wow. And just for our listeners who may not be familiar with permaculture, the way I often define it is a system for thinking and designing and reimagining human relationship on this planet in ways that we could actually practice leaving the planet better than we found it, in terms of not just the ecological aspects, but also the social aspects, how humans relate to one another. So permaculture, in short, it would be a design system. And would you have anything to add to that definition or how it informed you in architecture school?
No, I mean, I love that. I guess another way of thinking of it would be, just really trying to integrate nature and recognize that we are part of nature. Like, we're humans. It's so easy to go through the world and be like, I'm a human. And not only that, I'm an individual kind of operating on my own, going through the world that way. So obviously pervasive in this culture to think that way. And then nature's over there. But I think what permaculture is trying to do is like really say like, well, we're both part of the same cycles, right?
If we were to walk around in our world thinking that we're connected to nature, we wouldn't be able to permit the profitability of our economic system that is based and founded upon exploitation of nature. So
right.
It'd be a big problem for the world's economy.
For the way we work. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're in architecture school and you have got this bug in your bonnet about the death care industry, or should we even call it a care industry, the death model in our communities. And what happened next?
First of all, I was thinking very much as an individual, like what would I want for my body? And that sort of started my process. I come from a kind of more or less non-religious family. And so there was no specific like religious scripture. Okay, well, you do this with your body when someone dies. And so by and large, my family members were choosing cremation, which by the way, is very common now. More than 50% of Americans now choose to be cremated. And in places like Seattle, where I'm located, the number is around 96%. People choose cremation. So burial in the conventional manner that we think of it is going away. And there's a few reasons for that. Partly people don't live in the same place often. And so why have a family plot if you're going to move across the country? And then also conventional burial. And by the way, when I say conventional, I'm talking about a concrete grave liner, a steel or wooden casket, typically the body being embalmed, which means preventing decomposition of the body through chemical fluids and formaldehyde-based fluids, yep. And then a headstone and a grave site in a cemetery that's typically mown and watered, right? So that's when I say conventional burial, that's what I'm talking about. Slowly, though, in the US, that's going away and cremation is becoming the most popular choice, or has become the most popular choice. It's also less expensive than conventional burial. So you can, and people have this perception that cremation is less environmentally harmful. And so if you're like, oh, it's cheaper, it's simpler, and it's more ecologically friendly, that's great. I'll choose cremation. Well, cremation is actually not better for the environment than conventional burial. In fact, they're about on par with each other from a carbon footprint standpoint, interestingly. You've got on the one hand, the manufacture and transport of the graves and the headstones and the upkeep of the cemetery. And on the other hand, you have the burning of fossil gas, typically, that is what's used to incinerate a body, and then the particulates and mercury and carbon that's emitted. So they're actually kind of on par, which is, I think, one of the early things I learned and was fascinating. So back to grad school, I immediately knew that like neither of those options really resonated for me. Didn't really want to be cremated, felt a little wasteful, like, well, I'm going to have something left in my body when I die, like some nutrients, even if I'm like, hopefully, God willing, a shriveled old lady by that time, like, wouldn't I want that to go back to the earth? And cremation to me was like, oh, that's kind of it's a little wasteful, just in terms of my own body. And then conventional burial had never been something I was into. And so perhaps you've heard of something called natural burial, which is where the body is typically either wrapped in a shroud or put in a like simple pine box or cardboard box sometimes and buried in land that is kept up naturally or not kept up I should say, depending, and often is tied with conservation land. So you might have your body placed in the ground somewhere that then is considered conservation burial grounds for forever. Beautiful concept. And I found out about that and thought, that's gorgeous. What a beautiful idea. Just give your body back to the earth. And yet there's a piece of me that knows I'll never live rurally again. And I'll always live in some urban center, hopefully many over my lifetime. I love being in the city. I just find it inspiring and exciting, and it's just for me. And there's clearly millions and millions and millions of people, billions all over the world who love to live in cities as well. Natural burial really is a rural solution, right? It's something that's been practiced for millennia also. And so I started to wonder, what would an urban equivalent be of natural burial?
So one thing I love about what you do, Katrina, and I'd love our listeners to take a deep breath with us in this. Talking about death is really challenging for a lot of people and might even prevent people from caring about what happens to our body after we die. So on the one hand, there's this economic reason in that I think death care is one of the third highest expenses an average US citizen will have in their lifetime. It's some weird, really expensive typically. And then talk to us a little bit about, how do you enter into this conversation with folks, and what is all the legwork that you've done over many, many years now to make this conversation even feasible in the cultural context that we find ourselves in?
That's such a good question. You may be able to hear in my voice that really this stuff just inspires me so much. I think for many people, kind of starting with the puzzle of what do you want to have happen to your body when you die, and then talking through some of the realities, you don't need to get too detailed most of the time, and then I found that in providing a new and emerging option for bodies, people really often love to talk about it, love to get started thinking about this. Now, that's not to say that everyone wants to. It's definitely can be really hard to do. And so I think approaching it again from a design challenge perspective makes it maybe a little bit more approachable.
And also timing, right?
Timing,
so
absolutely.
I could imagine timing this before people are in a really severe grief moment of, you were 30 when you started thinking about the future of your body.
Yeah, well, and in fact, it's good that you mentioned timing, because so I'll just kind of wrap up the story of the creation of Recompose so that we can kind of talk in more general terms. But my friend, so I was in grad school thinking about my own mortality, looking at the other options and thinking that'd be cool if there was some way to integrate back into the earth in an urban setting. And I also, just as a side note, I got fixated on the concept of nature, and in kind of an academic way, what is nature? We always think about things growing. When we think about nature, we think about trees and flora. But isn't nature actually dirt? Isn't the soil the basis of everything living? And so I started to think about, what if we thought of nature in the city as the dirt, not as the plants? And somewhere around there, my friend Kate of Yestermorrow, historically was at Yestermorrow and is my oldest friend actually, called me and asked if I'd heard of the practice of farmers composting cows. And that's a light bulb moment. I was like, really? Whole cows? She was like, yep, whole cows. It's been happening for decades. It's a really common practice on farms. It's a really common practice, in fact, by departments of transportation. So with roadkill, they compost them. And it was a real light bulb moment. So I shifted, or I absorbed that idea and started focusing on composting humans after we've died. And that became the Urban Death Project, which was doing early research and kind of figuring out if there was an appetite for this idea out there in the world. Because at first I thought it was probably Kate and my parents that were like, yeah, great idea, Katrina. Compost humans. Yeah, sure. No, that sounds great. And as I spoke with people, I found that there is this really deep desire. Once you started thinking about your own mortality, there was a really deep desire in many people to have something to do with your physical body that aligned with the way you live, and aligned with the way you think of the cycles and the planet. So the big caveat is once you've started to accept your mortality, and that, that's a big one, and now have created Recompose to offer that service to the world. And lo and behold, people really do want something new, new/old, because composting is also ancient.
With Recompose, tell us a little bit about that journey. As an entrepreneur, you have struggled, as many women in this space, to raise capital. And could you give our listeners a window into that journey of actually creating this business, regulations?
Yeah, so actually, I think, let's see. So the first thing I found out was people seem to want this. Okay, so what do we need to do in order to bring it to the world? And let me quickly tell you what composting is when we're talking about Recompose and this particular death care process. We have what we call a vessel, which is a fancy word for a large container that is cylindrical. Imagine a can on its side. And then imagine those cans are set into a hexagonal array that's about 13 feet tall. Okay, so it looks a little bit like a honeycomb, and each vessel is nestled with its neighbors, but is on its own. And when you die, we lay a mixture of wood chips, alfalfa, and straw into that vessel, like a bed, and we lay the person's body on top, and then cover them with more of the same. So you're kind of cocooned in this vessel with all that plant material. And then for the next 30 days, not a whole lot happens. For the first week, we lay the body still. It just stays there still, lying there, starting to decompose, in fact. And then we aerate the vessel. So all that's happening is we're pulling air through on a pretty slow basis, providing oxygen to the microbes that are on us right now, Erin, as we speak. They're in the air and they're on the wood chips. And those microbes start to break the body and the plant material down. After about a week, we slowly rotate everything inside. And we do that a few times periodically for the rest of the month. After a month's time, we take the soil or compost out and screen and sort it for non-organics, because sometimes we have metal or plastic in our bodies when we die. And we then have it cure for another couple of weeks. And so curing for compost is like kind of drying out and finishing all of the microbial activity. And then what we found is half of the families that we work with want to come and get it. So they come and pick up a cubic yard of soil. And the other half, typically get a small box that we send to them. And then the rest gets donated to conservation efforts here in Washington State. So that's just to give you a whole quick picture of what the composting process is like. We should touch on this, is like ritual and ceremony is really important, I think. When someone dies, I've always had issue with the don't make a fuss. Well, you've just died. It's about the biggest thing that'll ever happen to you. I kind of think we should make a little fuss, at least when someone dies. And so Recompose really encourages some ceremony or ritual. So what we do is actually, right now they're all by Zoom, but we have a laying in ceremony where our staff lay the person's body on camera with the family there. Into the vessel, say some words about the carbon cycle, and just really have a moment where we mark their return to the earth that way.
That's beautiful. So sweet. And it makes it sound like a real incredible honoring of the next phase in the journey, whatever your religious beliefs are.
It's a moment.
Vessel.
Yeah.
Yes. And we know that we're sending that person off onto this transformation physically, and then whatever else, as you pointed out. Yeah.
So you brought up the carbon cycle, and I think many of our listeners are thinking carbon equals bad, right? Because we have this huge issue of too much carbon in the atmosphere that's contributing to the climate crisis. But could you maybe give a brief definition of what do you mean when you talk about the carbon cycle?
I'll do my best. You can weigh in as well, because I think you're probably a little better at speaking of it than I am. But so first of all, we're all made of carbon. in part, right? Carbon is everything. And so part of what the composting process does is it takes the carbon in our bodies and in the wood chips and the plant material and actually sequesters it and puts it into this different form, in this case, compost. And that can be then used to grow new life. And so when we're talking about the cycle, what we're talking about is that part of the cycle where we're actually being sequestered, creating this new material. We're also, so we're sequestering the carbon, which is great. And then, so that's kind of, some people say it's like, it's making it more secure. So it's not going into the atmosphere. And it's worth noting that we're also avoiding the fossil gas used in cremation or the fossil gases used and fossil fuels used to take care of cemeteries and conventional burials. So we also have, like, on our balance sheet of carbon, the avoidance of those things.
And concrete is, as a material, is one of the highest embodied carbon materials we can use. So every time we make concrete, the Portland cement that goes in that's mined from far away is really exacerbating climate change. So the reductions in concrete use is huge.
Yes. But, Erin, you asked about fundraising.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I went on to a completely different path about what it means to be composted, which is important because you need to know.
Yeah, but we'll get to all of these pieces, but I'm glad we have the grounding in. And if there's anything else you'd like to say on the context of your solution or the Recompose solution, because I know it's a huge team that is a part of making this happen and a lot of history that has gone into this, how it is situated in the context of climate as a climate solution. I think that was important. So thanks for...
Yeah, oh, for sure. No, that's great. Yeah, so when the idea occurred that, and by the way, I know it's probably occurred to a lot of people to compost themselves. I've spoken with a lot of farmers in the past decade who are like, oh yeah, I compost my cows. I always thought it might be kind of nice to just compost myself. So it was certainly not my idea first. But when I thought about the possibility of bringing it to the public, to the world, the first thing I realized was that it wasn't legal. And so I was like, shit, well, okay. So one of the first things we had to do was put together a strategy for making human composting an allowable method of death care for humans. And so when you talk about the team, we have this amazing team that's been working for a long time on this. One of the people on that team, Tanya Marsh, is sort of like the foremost expert of cemetery and funeral law in the US. And so she became an early advisor, helping me figure out the strategy. We've now legalized this process in 3 states, Washington, Colorado, and Oregon. And we're working hard on California and a couple of East Coast states, and not planning on stopping that process anytime soon. And what we found is that legislators, who are people too, by and large, even if they don't want this process for themselves, like, get that it's better to have more options rather than fewer. And so there's been a real interest in moving this stuff forward, which is great. There's not a ton of opposition except for the Catholic Church, which I would say they've got kind of lukewarm opposition to us just because maybe they have to, I don't know. And then on top of that, it was, how can we test this? How can we research it? How can we prototype it? And then how can we build it? And so that, as you can imagine, takes a ton of capital, right? Like, I had early on running this nonprofit, the Urban Death Project, getting lots of interest from people all over the world and thinking, God, I really need like millions of dollars to launch this. So I don't know if the nonprofit, if I can do that much fundraising in that format. And I decided to start a public benefit corporation, Recompose, and raise capital through investors, and have raised, I think, somewhere like around 16 million so far with a A1, A2, and now we're right in the middle, or actually I should say we're 2/3 done with our A3 round, raising $15 million to do the next phase of the work.
So inspiring. Wow. What are some lessons you've learned along the way, or insights from that process of having an idea, presenting it to people, problem solving?
Well, it's like my girlfriend says to me, if I ever get stressed out, which is like, every couple of weeks I'll get in this stress hole. And she's like, one foot in front of the other, which sounds like it sounds trite, but it is actually the only way to do anything. Is you just have to keep moving forward. If you don't have a budget on the Excel spreadsheet and it's blank, you just have to put things on the paper, or paper in quotes. I mean, it sounds so silly, but it really is about just moving forward every day, small steps, and they just eventually will lead to bigger things. When it comes to raising money, my best advice is to get really clear on the type of investor you're looking for and really clear on your values, and then write them down and put it out there. So on our website right now at recompose.life, L-I-F-E, we have an invest page. So like interested investors can go there and read a little bit about our offering. Not like the whole thing, but they can read a little bit about our business philosophy. Well, we believe in growing because we know that people want to be composted and we need to be there for them to do that. But we also don't believe in growth at all costs. So we want our investors to know that we don't believe in growth at all costs. And in fact, we're really considerate and intentional when we think about growing. So that and we also, for example, we know that because of that, in part because of that, we're not a fit for venture capital. And so when venture capitalists write me and say, hey, I'd like to learn more about your company, I say, hey, we're not a fit for venture capital. I don't say, let's have a phone call, because actually that's a waste of time for you and a waste of time for me. And so there's some of the, and by the way, that second example, it took me years to realize that I could just respond that way. So I'm not saying it's easy or that it's like, I'm full of confidence always in that, but I know now that it's the right path, and that if I do some screening and picking and choosing and vetting of our investors, it's better for Recompose for sure, and it's better for the investors, in fact, too. And most of our investors are really enamored by the fact that we don't have venture capital investment.
Amazing. And if anyone listening to this podcast has further questions about how do I determine if it's a venture capital investor and all that, please, we have resources on our website. I'm sure people can reach out to you or Jenny Cass, and I hope that people's curiosity gets sparked by that statement, Katrina, because it is so profound. Being choosy about the types of capital you take can be a make or break for your business. I'm curious what you're most excited about coming up with Recompose.
It has been like a joy to build a team. I was working with amazing advisors and consultants, but technically the only staff person for, I think, almost 7 or 8 years. And then now have this team of 17 and counting of really awesome people. So I would say, if you ask me what's been most inspiring in the last 3 years, it's been building a team of people who are doing all this work, bringing someone on, not knowing exactly what they will bring to the work, but knowing it's going to be something special that you can't even foresee yet. That's a lot of fun. In terms of looking towards the future, we have one location where we compost humans right now. We are opening a larger location in Seattle in April. So I'm really excited for that. And we'll be able to host people there. So we'll be able to have families gather there and actually partake in the laying in ceremony. And very excited about that. And then we're looking to build out a place in Denver next. And so I'm super excited about Denver. And then who knows what the next place will be, but I love to think about design and construction and think about how to create places that have meaning and that just work for the task.
And what are the things that you really struggle with that keep you up at night? Or, I mean, building a team is no small feat.
No, it's not easy. It is challenging to this work. In fact, much like architecture, being an entrepreneur is a lot of figuring out what you don't know, because you really can never be doing all the work, nor should you. But you do need to have a good sense of what kind of skill sets, what kind of expertise you need to find. And architecture is actually very similar, where the architect is meant to, manage the project, but bring on structural engineers, bring on electrical, et cetera, et cetera. So they're similar in that way. So I've had a fair amount of experience knowing that my main role is to get the resources. And that's often people and their skill sets and their expertise. and their mindsets. And then it's also money. But I will say it is, as I've brought so many folks on as full-time staff, it has been challenging asking myself practically every morning, like, what's my role today? And how can I do the best job being there for the team? Like, being there for the team is probably not going to mean I'm jumping into a spreadsheet and going deep. So that's probably not the best use of my time. But so what does it mean? Like, how can I support and make everyone who I hope finds this work inspiring? Like, how can I help make them, I don't know, just be their best work selves? And how can I be my best work self? Those are the biggest challenges.
Are there moments when you feel really drawn into the weeds and the nitty gritty and you have to stop yourself and say, how do I support others in their skill building?
Yeah, sometimes. And then sometimes, like my capital project manager, it will pass me. She knows how much I love some of the design work or like being in the weeds a little. So she'll pass me a small project that lets me go like really deep into, chair selection for the gathering space in the new facility. And to be fair, we're all really busy. So it's not like she doesn't legitimately need that help as well. But I can tell, I have this sense that she's like, you know what, Katrina would like this one. So here you go. So I get to go deep sometimes, it's not like, but it is, I think, especially as a founder. So like inventor founder, going to CEO and trying to build the team is really important to just constantly be asking, like, am I working on the right things? And then also, God forbid, I'm not micromanaging, because no one wants to do that. So those things, but it's a kind of a constant shedding of roles every day.
I love it. Well
There's
said.
got to be some sort of animal metaphor in there, right?
Yeah, like the exoskeleton.
Yes. Daily exoskeleton shedding.
Wow, way to reboot. I love how you describe this culture where people's strengths are really enlivened and you're creating cultures where people can really live into their passions and support one another into doing those activities that light them up. Really inspiring. So as we come to a close here, we could talk for many more hours, and there are many incredible videos and other podcasts that folks have done on your work. So we'll link to them in the show notes. What support do you need this year, 2022, to help you breathe life into this incredible vision for humanity that you're bringing to bear? What support do you need? How can listeners help you?
Well, I love when I hear that someone listened to a podcast and then became an evangelist for the idea. So feel free to go out and, have those conversations at the dinner table. I genuinely think that especially for folks who find it like a little difficult to start those conversations, drop the idea of human composting, at the Thanksgiving dinner table, and people will start to talk about it. I can basically promise you that. Yeah. So please become an evangelist if you find it inspiring. We have a newsletter people can sign up for. And definitely for those folks who have wealth and are looking to invest it, I just need to wrap up this. I've got 6 million to go. Just got to wrap it up. I've got 5 million to go. Who knows? Maybe I'll be done really soon, but always interested in bringing on new people to invest. And then, cure COVID, please. That would be really nice.
How has COVID impacted Recompose? Just death is so up right now in this planetary moment because of this pandemic. How has that been met at Recompose?
It has meant that there are more people dying. And so that it doesn't change our work there really in any material way. It has been really, we've grown our team entirely inside of the pandemic. And so there's so many times I wish I'd be in person with people, but we do a lot of work together on Zoom. I think that has been pretty hard on us. Of course, there's a few folks that are actually doing the composting, that are actually doing the death care work, that are at a physical place. You can't do that via an app, it turns out. And so sometimes we get to see each other, but that kind of stuff is hard for any organization. So that's not different for us. But in terms of, I do think people in the world are talking more about mortality. And so that's probably a good thing for all of us. I mean, I would like to just kind of pitch the reasons for talking about mortality. Like one of them, it's just reminds us so clearly that we're part of this grand cycle. So it can bring comfort, I think, to just see that part of, our small human lifespan and what part we play in the larger cycles and where our atoms and molecules might go next. To me, that's kind of exciting. So, or it gives me at least a little bit of comfort when I think about the end of life.
Absolutely. And I know I've even learned from you, there's so many diverse traditions around where those atoms go. Everything from sky burials to different other forms of shrouds. And I appreciate that invitation to talk about those rituals and customs and ceremonies and reimagine how it could be today. So people can learn more about you at recompose.life. And they can sign up for a newsletter. Are there other places they can learn about your work?
My favorite recent piece was a YouTube video by Caitlin Doty. She's a friend. I've known her since probably about 6 years or 7 years, and she's a mortician. And she came to the greenhouse, which is what we call our current facility. We call it the greenhouse because we put it up sort of to be temporary, and it's in a warehouse, but it's to be temporary, and it's where we kind of unearthed and grew the beginning of the work. So she came to the greenhouse, and I walked her through the process there and showed her the vessels and pretended she was dead and put plant material on her and did great things. And she's a wonderful storyteller and does a really nice job of showing you Recompose through this video.
I love that video. I loved how you showed the vessels, but you also showed the place that the compost goes. And that video showed, actually, I think there was even a little girl in that video who ran out in the compost and started doing a cartwheel or something.
There was a story about that girl, and I love that your memory has almost created her. That is so cool. I mean, she exists and did do that, and yet it wasn't on film. I love that. Yeah. Yep. Now we've spoiled the end. Watch the video. Yeah. It's a good one.
Well, Katrina, thank you so much for joining us on Next Economy Now. And I really, really appreciate the perseverance and the creativity and determination that you're bringing to this work. Stay in touch. Let us know how we can continue to help and support and share.
Thank you. It was great to chat.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.